Well, welcome back.
Yay! Second week of Memoir Madness. I'm excited.
Yes, me too. I listened to this memoir. We did Beyond the Wand by Tom Felton this week. I listened to it, you read it.
hmm
It was,
And hopefully our listeners read it. If you haven't, feel free to pause this video, read it, or listen to it, and then come back when you're done.
yes, I feel like it was so good and so honest. And I feel like with most audiobooks, I probably could have read it myself faster, but
hmm
there's something about somebody telling their story in their own voice that just melts my heart in this case because Tom Felton was so honest. Not everything was bright and happy, but it was real, and I appreciated that.
So did he do the audiobook?
He did.
Wow.
And I just love British accents.
It does make it easier to get through, I'm sure.
Yes.
Obviously, I read it, so I didn't hear his voice as I'm reading it, but I did like his distinct writing voice. Like it, you could tell a ghostwriter didn't write it. It was his own words, but he's very intelligent, funny,
Yes, and
interesting.
he's very interesting, and I loved how each chapter had a dual chapter title,
hmm
and I thought that was really cute. Just because I feel like it was like more of an insight of him and his thought process.
Yeah, you're right. Like for example, let's look. So the first chapter is called Undesirable Number One, or Draco's First Scrape with the Law. Chapter two, My Muggle Family, or Runt of the Pack. So, as you said, it's distinct, it's unique. It kind of reminds me of, because I'm such a Friends whore, like all the Friends episodes started with the one, like the one with the duck, or the one with the break. So
Yes,
it was cute how he did his chapters in his own way.
I do really like that about Friends too. I'm not a huge Friends stan like you, but I have seen a lot of the ones, and
hmm
I love. I don't know if it's on Netflix anymore, but it used to be, and then just flip through and read the episode titles.
Oh, that's cute.
Uh,
Yeah. So overall, like, what did you think of the book?
I really liked it. There was a lot that I didn't know about Tom Felton. I didn't know that his first movie was, well, he had been in a couple commercials, but his first movie was The Borrowers. Do you remember that movie with John
I
Goodman?
I do remember that movie.
I didn't know that was him.
I didn't either.
Uh,
And didn't he say that his father in The Borrowers was the actor who ended up playing Arthur Weasley?
yes,
That's such a funny coincidence.
it is. Obviously saw that movie a very, very long time ago. I'm a big John Goodman fan.
Me too. And I
Oh,
think that's why I didn't remember anyone else besides John Goodman in it.
probably, because I mean, he even talks about not knowing the actors to the scale that they
hmm
were. And I think when you're a kid, you associate an actor with a particular thing, and John Goodman was very big in the 90s. So
Very
all the other ones, we weren't seeing a lot of grown-up movies that the actor of Arthur Weasley was probably in.
true. Yeah, The
And
Borrowers, if you've never seen it, it's about these tiny people who live in the walls of houses. And the movie was really cool because when you could see where they lived, everything looked mini. But Tom explains that in actuality, everything was huge because they didn't have the CGI that they have now to make everything look tiny.
oh,
And I didn't know it was made from a book that was written in the 50s. Now I want to read the book.
that would be really fun to read.
Yeah. And I don't
Oh,
think it's long. It's just a little children's chapter book. So we should read that.
We should. Oh, such a cute movie. And he was also in The King and I, which was another big movie in his very early career.
Yes, Anna and the King, because I
Anna
think
and
The
the
King and
King.
I is an older version, but that
Okay.
was a huge movie. I
Jodie
didn't know he was in
Foster.
that.
I didn't
Mm-hmm.
either. And that's it's so crazy to think because he was talking about this really like resonated with me that in his early life he was very enthusiastic about a lot of hobbies and skills he wanted to learn, but he wasn't very good at them. So,
Mm-hmm.
like his father thought that acting was just going to be one of those things, but I know growing up, I had it in my head that I was going to be like a tennis star or a water polo champion. I'm just like, how hard can it really be? So, those things are very hard. I did do those things, but I was never the star I thought I was.
Yes, he said that he tried lots of things like skateboarding and art and
Yo-yoing,
yeah, yo-yoing, and none of them
hockey,
really stuck. Hmm.
violin,
Yes,
yeah.
that's
Which is,
amazing.
I mean, he talks about how much he loves his mom and how she nurtured those things in him that she never wanted to tell him no, that he could not try something. And I think that's really important. We didn't have those
Hmm.
same opportunities to try the things we really wanted to as children, but I think it's so important that if you can, to just foster that love of learning
Yes.
that children have.
And I loved how he recognized and appreciates that they didn't have the money for him to do all those things. His mom would work extra hours and even second jobs to provide those things. And that is such a blessing. Like, we never had that. There was lots of things we wanted to do, and we were just told we can't afford it. But I love that she didn't want to tell him no. Like there, of course, you have to tell your children no to some things. Like you can't let them eat whatever they want or stay up as late as they want. But to give them the chance to try enough things to find out what they're actually passionate about is the greatest gift. And he's so lucky, and I'm glad that he realizes he's so lucky.
He is, and I love that even though he talks about complaining about when he was in Anna and the King because of the wardrobe and how long it took to get in it, and
Being in another country where he couldn't get the food he was used to and
yes, it does seem like it is something he really wanted to do. And I
yes,
really appreciate because you hear so many child actors that don't want to do it.
right.
And so it makes me so happy when you read about a child actor that wants to do it. Like when we talked about last week, Naya Rivera, she wanted to. Even though it
Hmm.
started before she could remember, she wanted to as early as she could remember.
Yeah, it makes me feel better too as like a consumer of media, knowing that not all kids are being exploited.
And I think as time goes on and there's more laws made, it's less likely, but realistically, they are around our age. And in the early 90s, there weren't these laws to keep kids, safe from being exploited.
Right. I know.
So,
I think we kind of touched on that last week, like you said, and it was funny because right after we recorded our last podcast, I read about how Washington is the first state in the country who is trying to pass a law that will give those rights to children on the internet. Because right now, kids are being exploited on TikTok and YouTube, and Washington wants laws in places where advertisers can't like they can't have the same advertising, and if there is money being made off that, there needs to be a savings account just like in movies and television.
there does. I feel like social media influencers are still a fairly new concept, especially
Hmm.
with it being children. And it is kind of a gray area for a lot of people. I don't think it's a gray area. I think there needs to be laws, but I think
Mm-hmm.
that's where the gray area is
Yeah.
there are no laws, and at least there is progression of people trying to make those laws happen.
Mm-hmm. And it does seem like Tom Felton had an overall very good experience acting, and I wonder how some of that is obviously his family and how they chose to handle things, but I wonder how much of that was also being a British actor instead of one from the United States.
That's very true because he does talk a lot about how, especially he has three older brothers, how they never let him forget that he was, in their words, a maggot, you know,
Yeah.
or a runt. And because he was
Hmm.
the youngest, so I think that is really important because I do feel that a lot of children actors that are American, they are not told from an early age no. Like nobody tells
Hmm.
them that. Nobody denies them the things that they want because they're being exploited. It's a vicious cycle. Not all of them are being
Very good point.
exploited, but
No,
they're trying to be placated to continue to be a cash cow, so to speak.
you're so right. Are you gonna ground your 10-year-old who's paying for your house? That's a
Yeah.
very good point.
Oh, and I I have to bring this up because I thought it was hilarious that because I feel like this just shows Tom Felton's family and how normal they are. And when they went to the premiere of The Borrowers, his two of his brothers got drunk, like young
Yes.
teenagers, and they had like a bouncy castle because it was a kids movie, and his brother threw up in the bouncy castle. And they were like, 13, 14 years old, and I feel like that's so, you know, he doesn't talk about it as like he's super mortified by it anymore or he
Hmm.
thinks it's a good laugh, but I think it just goes to show you that you can think you're somebody, but then at the end of the day, your family is always there to remind you who you are.
That's such a good point. I saved that part in my ebook because I thought it was hilarious and I wanted to read it a little bit. So, as you said, they were at the premiere of The Borrowers. So, this was Tom Felton's first movie and also his first movie premiere. So, his parents were really excited to see him in it. And it sounds like the premiere is the first time that actors get to see the whole movie at once, too. So, it was the first time Tom was going to see himself. And he was saying there was so much free champagne being passed around, and his brothers kept sneaking it. So his 16-year-old brother had to leave right as the movie was starting. And after a few minutes, he hadn't come back. So the dad was like, God, okay, I have to go check on my son. So he says, my dad muttered a few choice words and went off to find his wayward eldest son. Predictably enough, he was locked in a toilet cubicle on his knees, worshipping the porcelain as the free champagne worked its way back out. My dad stood outside the cubicle, suited and booted, while Jink heaved his guts out. And the icing on the cake? A punter wandered in and, seeing him standing there in his suit, mistook my dad for a toilet attendant and tipped him a pound. It was not all in all how he expected his evening to pan out, but he did keep the pound. So Jink missed the film, my dad missed the film, and the evening's festivities weren't over yet. A huge after party followed. It was held in a massive warehouse dressed with the oversized props from the film, with music, games, sweets, and you guessed it, more free champagne. This time it was the turn of Ash, aged 13 and following in his older brother's footsteps, to sample the fruits of the French countryside. With several glasses down his gullet, he decided it would be a good idea to have a go on the enormous bouncy castle with Chris. It was not a good idea. The bouncy castle was being used by kids half their age and size. Chris accidentally kneed a 9-year-old in the back of the head. Not to be outdone by his older brother, Ash took a few bounces and then projectile vomited in spectacular fashion into the corner of the castle. He crawled off the castle, belched loudly, and announced, I feel much better now. All in all, I think it's fair to say the behavior of the Felton brothers that evening was, at best, mixed, but I didn't let it upset me. I just enjoyed the evening for what it was. After all, it wasn't like I had any big hopes of being an actor, or even more likely a movie star. And you're so right. Like, I do think his family kept him grounded. That was what I took away most from this book, was just how relatively normal his life got to be.
He does point out quite a few times how his role and his part in the movie differed a lot from Daniel, Rupert, and Emma, and
Yes.
how he understood that they did not get the same experience that he did because
Yes.
there were some movies that he wasn't in a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think he he even talked about working at like a fishery. I'm not exactly sure what kind of job that was, but it sounds like he was working like a tackle shop. And
Mm-hmm.
he said that nobody hardly ever recognized him. Just sometimes journalists would come by and, write a story about his muggle life and his muggle job. But other than that, he said these old fishermen, they didn't know who he was and they didn't really care. And I do think that his perspective, that he's able to realize that he had these wonderful experiences, but not all of his co-stars got those same experiences because of the fame.
Yeah. He talks about how like Emma Watson and him were hanging out at the beach once because he loves the ocean and he loves to go to the beach, and how they were having fun and he would go there all the time by himself and rarely get recognized. But once she was with him, they didn't have privacy anymore. There was a bunch of paparazzi coming and they just had to end their day. And that would be really sad, like hanging out with a friend that you don't get to see that often and wanting to have a nice day together and just being swarmed.
I know. And he does talk a lot about his relationship with Emma and how it's hard for them to explain their relationship because it's not romantic now, even though in the past they may have had feelings for each other at different times. They're
Mm-hmm.
just best friends. And I think that's so amazing. I have this piece from the book that I wanted to share. It says, one time we met up outside of Hogwarts, something that I rarely did with anybody else from the cast or crew, because I preferred to return to the ordinariness of my day-to-day life. I picked her up and we went for a long walk around a lake close to my home. Emma spent a good deal of time reprimanding me for smoking. Then she suddenly told me something that will always remain with me. I have always known that I was a duck, she said, but I've spent my whole life being told that I was a chicken. Every time I tried to say quack, the world would tell me I have to say cluck. I even started believing that I was a chicken and not a duck. Then we started to hang out. I found somebody else who quacked, and that's when I thought, to hell with them. I really am a duck. And I just
Mm-hmm.
thought that was so sweet. I almost cried when I heard him reading it, and it's just sometimes I feel when you're out living your day-to-day life, you have to be on and you have to present yourself a certain way to be socially acceptable, whether you're at work or at the mall, it doesn't matter. And then to just be with somebody that you're so comfortable around that you don't feel like you always have to be on.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was super sweet.
It is sweet. Everybody needs a friend like that. And I'm sure it's annoying for them that people are always wondering if they're dating and stuff. Fuck, I do it. But I didn't realize he's 3 years older than her. So they met when he was 12 and she was 9. And it's understandable why they would have more of like a sibling relationship and how they didn't even necessarily get along at first. He says the first time he met her, they were still doing auditions, but the director had them on set to see how they would interact with each other and interact with the props and stuff and take directions. And she asked what like a certain camera or microphone was, and he said that he was really snotty and like because he had been into movies at this point and was like, you don't know what that is? That's a such and such, and was kind of a jerk to her. But obviously they grew closer as time went, and it is very sweet. But there's also that part of me that is like, well, now they're older. And he explains how he was in a relationship with this one woman for a very long time, like while the movies were still being made. But then they broke up. So now maybe that they're both adults and single. You never know.
You never know. I think there's always rumors about that they are. And part of
Mm-hmm.
me kind of hopes they're true sometimes, just because I
Mm-hmm.
think it would be so sweet because they have known each other for so long. And he talks about how, I think it was either the first or second movie, how she like came up with like a dance routine and like performed it for him and the actors that played Crab and Goyle, and they laughed at her and it really hurt her
Yeah.
feelings, and how the makeup person told him like you were really an ass and he
Yeah.
apologized. And I think that also stands the testament of kids, that they're
Mm-hmm.
easier to forgive than adults.
That's true. And they're still figuring out how to socially interact. I feel like kids can be a lot meaner towards each other, but they learn the hard way what it actually means to hurt someone's feelings and also how they can make up for it.
Yes, I remember times growing up that we hurt each other's feelings and we were
Mm-hmm.
best friends. So I don't think that it's out of, I think when you're a kid, you don't know how to gauge the social situations sometimes of,
It's true.
a little girl putting on a dance routine for you. And
Right.
I mean, puberty is hard, and especially when you're a little bit older and you see somebody that's younger than you that, has a crush on you and is trying to get your attention. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
embarrassing.
It
I know
is.
I embarrassed a few guys back in the day,
Mm-hmm.
um, because female girls come on very strong to boys. I feel like boys don't come on strong until high school, but definitely late elementary, early middle school girls are very strong-willed when it comes to trying to get the attention.
The first time I ever got sent to the principal's office, which I'm a goody two shoes. Like I'm terrified of authority, but it was first grade, and this boy named Jeremy, who was fake married to me, married another girl on the playground, and I ripped a hole in his raincoat.
You were a very passive aggressive child.
Yes.
That's okay. I'm a
Yep.
passive aggressive adult, so there's just some things we never grow out of.
Oh,
Oh,
but yeah. Another thing that struck me was Tom's like kind of wild streak when he was young. He said the first part of his life, I think until age 9 or 10, he went to this really nice private school in England where everybody was taught to work really hard, like your studies mean everything. And then when he started doing the Harry Potter films, he needed the flexibility to miss a lot of school. Obviously, he still had to do like homeschool or tutoring on the set. There's laws where they have to do a certain amount of hours, but so he had to go out of the private school into public school for the first time, and he said it was a completely different experience where kids didn't think it was cool that he was in these movies. They called him the broomstick prick, and he said just feeling out of sorts of like not really fit, not really being in the world, but wanting to. He got attention by being the class clown and doing bad things. And the first chapter is actually about how he got caught shoplifting.
a porno.
Oh, I forgot about that part. I thought it
Yes.
was a CD.
Yeah, it was a dirty movie DVD at a CD store.
And he said it was between the first and second Harry Potter film. So he must have been about 12 or 13.
Yes. And he did say that he was so mortified because they took his picture and put it on the wall there, told him never to come back. But he
I
was
did
very
save,
happy they didn't call his mom.
yes, I did save part of that part because this was like, it was a great choice for the first chapter because it really drew me in and like his voice is really strong in it and it's funny too. So he said, um, even the top boys were reluctant to commit a crime of this gravity with all the potential for extreme embarrassment, which is why I volunteered to do the deed. Reader, the artful dodger I was not. Palm sweating, pulse racing, I entered the shop with excruciating casualness. The smart move would have been to identify the prize, swipe it, and get out of there as quickly as possible. Maybe if I had a bit more slither and cunning about me, I'd have done just that, but I didn't. Rather than execute a swift, subtle theft, I located the DVD and then I stalked it. I must have wandered up and down the aisle 50 times, my skin tingling with apprehension. I even asked a random stranger if they would buy the DVD for me so I could feign success with the cool kids. The stranger rightly refused, and I continued my stake up and down the aisle, up and down, up and down. An hour must have passed. I honestly doubt there was a single security guard who hadn't clocked me by now. Whether they'd recognized the world's most inept shoplifter as the boy from the Harry Potter films, I couldn't tell you. What I do know is this. My hairdo was distinctive, if not downright weird. It was a beacon, and it made it impossible for me to melt into the background. I wished I hadn't volunteered. I knew it was stupid, but I couldn't face tucking my tail between my legs and leaving the shop empty-handed. So eventually I took a deep breath and went in for the dive, pretending to look at the ceiling. That's my favorite part. With sweaty, fumbling fingers clumsily ripping off the security sticker, I removed the shiny disc from its plastic box, slipped it into a pocket, and speed walked to the exit. I'd done the deed. I could see my crew outside and gave them a knowing smirk. I could sense their excitement. Then, disaster. I'd barely taken a single step outside the shop when three burly security guys surrounded me. So, as you said, they take him back and he's begging them not to call his mom, which they didn't, but they took his picture, hung it up, and said he could never come back. He was banned for life. And he said he hasn't. He's never gone in again.
Ah, that's so funny. Ah,
I I find it crazy that people at his school still didn't like him. Like he talks about being teased, and even this one time where he was out, I can't remember if he was out with his brother or his friends, but there were like these hooligans about to beat him up.
yeah, I remember that part. He said he was out with his friends, probably fishing, I think the story said.
Mm-hmm.
These hooligans came and his friends like basically ditched him, and then
Yeah.
his brother just happened to pull up at that time and got the but oh, that's so scary. And I think with kids it's they get jealous and then they ostracize because he was in this
Mm,
position where he was getting to do this amazing thing, and rather than be excited for him, they were ostracizing him because they didn't know how to. I don't know what they didn't know how to do, but I just think that they were jealous. And because I don't think that there's any kid that grew up around that time that wouldn't have loved to be in that movie.
right?
And
And
not
especially in England.
and not only was he in that movie, but he had a character. There were a lot of people that were background actors, but
Mm-hmm.
he had a character and he was a main part of the story, especially towards the end of the series.
Very true. And speaking of character, he does touch on that a lot, how playing such an iconic character, he realized it was very hard for some people to not think of him as Draco Malfoy. Like he said, there were times he would be out in public and grown women would come up to him and say, "Why are you so mean to Harry? You're such a jerk."
I know. I wrote that down too to talk about because I cannot believe that there are people out there that cannot differentiate a character from a movie of magic. Like it's
Right?
not even based on a true story. It is a pure fiction work and that a grown but I feel like grown people have done that. They did it with Twilight, like they were in love with Edward Cullen, not Robert Pattinson. They were in love with Edward Cullen.
Yeah.
And one, I could not even imagine talking to a child like that.
No.
As a grown woman, just going up to a child and being like, "You're such a dick." Like,
Oh,
uh,
maybe I can
that's a
find
good
that part.
point. Yes. That's such a good point because I was like, what the hell? Like, people are crazy.
Another cool thing about this book is how when Tom is talking about or writing about certain experiences he's had, he wrote it like a script. And this is one example, one time he did that. So you and I can play the woman and Tom if you want.
Okay. He sets the scene that they're at an early premiere in America in New York. It says, a woman approached me with a steely glare. It says, Times Square, New York City, night.
Why are you such a dick to Harry?
Uh, I'm sorry, what?
Can't you just stop being such an asshole to him?
Tom glances sidelong, clearly wonder if he can make a sharp exit, but he can't. He's trapped. Er, you're joking, right? It's the wrong thing to say. The woman's steely glare becomes steelier. His eyes narrow, her lips thin.
I'm not joking. You don't have to be so evil to some poor guy who's lost his parents.
Tom opens his mouth, then he closes it. When he opens it again, he chooses his words with care. Righty ho. Okay, good point. I'll, do my best to be kinder in the future. It's what the woman wants to hear. Brow furrowed, she nods with satisfaction, turns her back on Tom, and stomps away.
And he goes on to say how, like, the first time this happened to him, it was a little kid who told him to piss off because he's such a jerk. And he said it's more understandable with kids, but it's even harder to understand when it's a grown adult. But he kind of has just learned to take it as a compliment that he has made the character so real to them, which is a good way to look at it.
Yes, or he talks about getting fan mail and how an adult man legally changed his name to Lucius Malfoy and wanted him to come live with him
I
as his
forgot
son.
about that.
You can't rape children that stuff.
And did it like he offered him money or something, I think. He said, I'm
Yeah,
very wealthy. You'll be taken care of. That is psychotic.
and luckily his mom did help him with his fan mail at that time and did not let him respond to that.
No.
Oh,
Oh my goodness. That's true. I've never, because I'm a fan of a lot of things. I would even say I'm a Harry Potter fanatic, but I have my both feet in reality.
yes, especially when adults. I don't think that Harry Potter is for adults or children, but it is a children's story.
Hmm.
I think anyone can enjoy it. But when a lot of the main actors, besides the professors, are children, it becomes very I don't even know the right word, very creepy and weird when people become obsessed with characters that are children and then morph that into an alternate reality where they think that
Mm-hmm.
these children are these characters when
Mm-hmm.
they're not, and that's so uh, just creepy and wrong.
Yeah, it is. Because I was 18 when I first started reading Twilight, and I was probably in my early 20s when the movies were finished. And I remember being creeped out by women in their 30s and 40s who are obsessed with these. I'm like, and I'm not the kind of person who thinks you're too old for something. I'm really not. I have a lot of hobbies and interests that people would say are childish, but it's just different. It's like an obsession and it is creepy.
It's
Like it's
definitely,
weird.
yeah, it's definitely crossing a line because, like you said, I don't think there's an age on things. You can like whatever you like, but when you detach from reality, that's when it becomes creepy.
I was, you totally are in reality, but I was remembering when I saw this one woman obsessed with Twilight back then, and I remembered she had like a Twilight living room with Edward Cullen pillows, and then I was laughing because you have a Louis Tomlinson pillow.
I have a blanket.
Oh, a blanket. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
and it is my car blanket that
Oh,
I cover up within the car because it gets cold in the mornings. But also, my whole house is not Louis Tomlinson. I
no.
also do have a One Direction pillowcase
Maybe
that,
that's what I was thinking
yes, it is a sequence that you can do both ways, and one side it's One Direction, one side it's gold.
of.
So I do have, but I also have Harry Potter throw pillowcases too.
Same. Yeah.
And
I'm literally looking at my pygmy puff and my Care Bears right now.
I know I have my little pygmy puff in my living room, and I love having all my things on display because I do have
Mhm.
so many interests. But also, I'm not writing letters to
No,
people saying like, "Come run away with me."
you're not changing your name to Georgia Rose.
That's just the name of my car. Which,
But we did agree your drag name would be Georgia Rose, and I'm Stevie Dix.
yes, those are the greatest names ever. And I was telling you yesterday, Work the World is going on tour, and they're coming to a city near me, and so I really think I'm gonna try to go. I'm gonna figure out my work schedule and see when I'm working and see if I can go or maybe take a day off so I don't have to wake up early and go to work. Um, but that would be so much fun.
That does sound fun. I think you really should if you can make it work.
Yes. And I was gonna also talk about there was a section in Beyond the Wand where Tom Felton talks about David Holmes, or as they call him, Holmesy. He was the stunt double that became paralyzed. He was a stunt double for both Daniel Radcliffe and Tom Felton and other actors, I do believe, but something went wrong and he became paralyzed from the waist down, I believe, or the neck down. And I just think that it's so amazing that he talks about his outlook on life is still amazing because going from doing stunts for major movies to being in a wheelchair for the rest of your life is very heartbreaking. And I also think it's very, very cool that they have a Gryffindor versus Slytherin cricket match for charity occasionally, and Daniel Radcliffe and Tom Felton are team captains, and it's for the Royal National Orthopedic Hospital, and I just think that's so cool that even after all this time, they still do something to honor Holmesy, but also a bigger charity that they're able to raise money for and donate to.
Hmm. Yeah. I, apparently this happened during the filming of The Deathly Hollows, and I had never heard anything about it until reading this book. And I agree with you. I loved that he wrote about it. He gave it a voice in a way, gave David a voice in a way, and gave David the respect that he deserves.
Yes.
Um, and what a tragedy.
I do remember hearing something about it around the time that it happened, or maybe after, a
Hmm.
couple years after it happened, that a stunt double had been seriously injured, but I didn't know his name or his
Hmm.
background of things that he did or could do. And you're very right that he gave this story that happened to David a voice, and that because I think Tom Felton is very aware that not everyone, like, even though he makes it apparent that he is not the same level as the trio, that he has
Hmm.
more celebrity than most that are associated with that film, especially in the background.
Yeah, you're so right. And like you said about the cricket match that they do for charity, that's something I loved about this book is how he talks about how not only him, but also like the trio and many other actors who were involved in the film, charity was huge. He said almost every day there were Make a Wish kids on the set, and how watching Alan Rickman interact with them, he would be Snape. He would tell a kid to tuck his shirt in or stop talking in the role of Snape. And Tom learned by that 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 was giving them the experience that being such an iconic character in such a huge franchise comes with this responsibility of giving back in some way. And they do a lot of charity work, and it's just so sweet. Like, I look at the Kardashians, they are billionaires. They have billions of dollars when you put it all together, and you don't see a lot of charity. I know that they do, but is it the same?
I don't think it is because it's not that Tom Felton or even Daniel Radcliffe are donating their personal money to these
Right.
causes, but they are
Yep.
giving their time. They're willing
Mm-hmm.
to get other people to donate to a cause. And I think putting a face that's as big as the Harry Potter franchise on a charity, you're getting more people aware of what's going on because they want to know what these people are involved in, and they're more likely to donate and,
Mm-hmm.
help these causes out.
And yeah, like you said, they're giving their time. Like it's not just about money. You can write a huge check, but that child with cancer doesn't care about $1 million, but they will never forget meeting Draco Malfoy. Or he said how every year he was it for Christmas, he goes to the hospital in in the character of Draco, um, gives out presents for all the kids who are stuck in the hospital on Christmas Eve, and how at the very last minute he called Rupert Grint one year because he didn't have someone else to go with him, and Rupert dropped everything he was doing and was there.
I think that's so amazing. I think when you look at child actors and how much they're scrutinized and put up on a pedestal, how a lot of them don't turn out upstanding citizens,
Mm-hmm.
but like Rupert and Tom, they were just able to go and not make a big show of it, where it wasn't like a media fueled thing. It was just them giving back. And something Tom talks about is keeping the magic alive, being in character, and answering questions in character about magic and not ruining the magic for the people that still have that magic.
Mm-hmm. It's wonderful. Do you happen to have a fun fact?
I did have a fun fact. Let me
We
grab it.
haven't done fun facts with Lily for a few weeks now. We've kind of just had so much shoved into our podcast that we didn't have time for it. But I miss fun facts with Lily. Well, it's a great place to take a break, so we'll be right back after a fun fact with Lily.
It's Fun Facts with Lily.
Dumbledore has a deeper meaning. It's actually an Old English word for bumblebee. Rowling has said that she chose the name because she always thought of Dumbledore humming to himself.
That is so cute.
I know. I didn't know
Okay,
that Dumbledore was Old English for bumblebee.
me either. Deep cut. Now we need to get. I want a bumblebee tattoo, and I want its flying pattern to be in the shape of a lightning bolt.
That would be really cute.
We should get it.
We should.
That's so cute.
I thought you were gonna say a bumblebee wearing a wizard hat.
Oh, that would be cute too.
It could be he could be wearing a little wizard hat and then his flight pattern and a lightning bolt. Oh, I've been wanting a tattoo lately.
Yeah, me kind of too. I was donating plasma for a while there, so I couldn't get anything, but I haven't gone in months. It I started making enough money at work now where it wasn't worth it.
Yeah, because it's the time.
Mm-hmm.
I always like to say, okay, it's gonna take me an hour and I make this much an hour. Is it worth my time?
Exactly. Yep.
So, and I don't feel bad for doing that. It's,
Mm-mm.
I think it's practical of how to weed things out that aren't worthwhile. And
I agree.
you don't have to say yes to everything and feel bad about saying no. We are adult people with adult lives, and if it's not worth the time that you could be making money, or if, but I also do believe that making money does not trump everything that we do. Like, I
No, of course not.
love being at home with my family. That's like one of my favorite things. And I'm like, I really don't want to work 2 or 3 days extra a week because,
Mm-hmm.
I can't get that time with my family back. So it's a balance. But I think when you look at it from both sides of, worth time, it's easy to figure out.
No, it's very true because time, money isn't everything, but time is very important, and time needs to be used wisely. It's one of the only things in this life that we will never get more of, and we don't know how much of it we actually have.
I know. Yeah, you just never know. And if something were to happen, I don't want, my friends or family to be like, oh, she was always working. Like,
Hmm.
I will work hard when I am scheduled to work, but I do like to relax hard and play hard on my time off.
It's so true. I've been having that dilemma lately because there's so many jobs where I know I can go make way more money than the job I have now. But will it be as rewarding? No, probably not. And will I have as much time with my family? No, I will not. So I just have to re-examine what I actually want out of life, what's actually important, and let go of some of the material things that I want.
That's true, and it's hard because I think in the society we live in today, it's always more or nicer.
Mm-hmm.
And
Newer,
yes,
faster, bigger.
yeah,
Well, getting back to Tom's book, one of the things I really liked about this book, because it could have gone either way before we read it, I wasn't sure, but he did include a lot of Harry Potter stuff, which as a fan, I appreciated.
I did too because I feel like some, especially child actors or actors from a big franchise, when they're trying to branch out, they try to distance themselves from what they're most famous from, and they don't talk about it. So I really enjoyed that he talked about it, especially with fondness about, the characters that played his family and played his teachers and his peers. I just thought it was so much fun.
I agree. Like something that kind of ruined the Twilight movies for me, and I didn't even end up seeing them all. I didn't see the second part of Breaking Dawn until this year. Actually, I guess the end of 2022. Because Robert Pattinson and Kristen Stewart talked so much shit about the movies and acted like they were so embarrassed to play these characters and they were embarrassed of the fandom. And it just put a sour taste in my mouth. And I'm so glad that Tom Felton didn't do that and that he does enjoy the work he's done on it.
That is so true because I feel like, especially in the case of like Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson, or even like Zayn from One Direction,
Oh, mm-hmm.
they kind of talk about it in a way that makes you think that they're not appreciative of their fans and the fame that they got because of those fans.
Yes.
I can agree with growing up and growing out of things, but at the end of the day, you have to appreciate the things that gave you the fame.
Yes.
And Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson definitely, they made it seem like you should be ashamed if you like the thing that they're in.
Because they didn't like it themselves. I mean, we still stand you, Robert. Like, we love you, marry us, but yeah.
Cedric Diggory, my heart.
Oh my gosh, like we meet him and call him Cedric.
Yes.
Why did you die in the goblet of fire? Why didn't you just let Harry grab the cup?
Yeah, he was the chosen one anyway. You should have known that. Ugh. I bet he would appreciate it more than being called Edward.
Probably.
Ugh.
Why did you ask Cho to the Yule Ball? You knew Harry liked her. It was
Uh,
obvious.
obvious. You're such a dick.
Piss off.
Like, you died and that traumatized Harry. Uh,
Oh, I loved how fondly Tom spoke of, even when Tom was insinuating that an actor wasn't necessarily a nice person. Like, he didn't say that about John Goodman, but he kind of did. He
yeah.
said something like John Goodman had no patience for the kids on set or something like that. But he spoke very fondly of like Robbie Coltrane. He said that he was always funny on set and really making sure the kids were taken care of and trying to make them laugh and not feel so much like a long day at work because they had some very long days.
Yes, and how Maggie Smith was very kind and very professional, even when, the director said, you're wasting Dame Maggie Smith's time. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I loved when he talked about like just how fun Chris Columbus was on the first two movies, and I think that's important that they felt it was a safe space and that Chris Columbus
Yes.
made it a safe space for children to want to do the work for this magic, how he hid the Great Hall from all the children actors until it was time to shoot that scene because he wanted
Mm-hmm.
that wonder to be conveyed purely.
I love that. And it makes me sad too because the first two movies did have a different feel about them. And maybe if Chris Columbus had stayed on, they still would have felt different because they do get the stories get darker as the storyline progresses. But there's just nothing like the magic of the first movie to me.
There isn't. The only thing I can maybe connect to the magic of the first movie is in the fifth movie when they see the Thestrals when Harry is able to see them for the first time.
Mm,
And I think that is really cool and magical. But you're right, the first two, like when they're on the lake at night in the boats and that,
yes, or the train with all the treats on the trolley. Because there definitely are those moments in all of the films. Um, I especially love the fifth movie, but yeah, I don't know, just from beginning to end, the first one, and maybe it was because it was the first time we saw it all on screen too.
yes, because we'd been imagining it, and I think people are very nitpicky with characters, but I I have no complaints about the sets and the scenes of how they set things up and
Hmm.
how it was visualized.
Yes, I love how because he said all the kids had to have a chaperone on set at all times, and the chaperones were responsible for making sure that they got all of the tutoring minutes they were supposed to get, and there was only a certain amount of time they could work, and how lots of the chaperones were totally standing there with a time, what do you call that, a
Stopwatch?
stopwatch, and making sure that they got all their minutes and weren't going over. But as he got old enough, his older brother, was it Chris,
Yes.
was his chaperone and would take him out fishing all night. Like they wouldn't go to sleep. And then his brother would be asleep in his trailer all day while Tom had to work, not having slept a wink. Um, but how his brother stole multiple things from the set, like props, books, and tickets to the Hogwarts Express, and maybe even a wand. And
I would have done
but
the
that
same
he,
thing.
me too. That's what I was gonna say. And he did say his brother ended up giving most of it towards charities like auctions and stuff. But I'm sure he has some stuff for himself, and I would too.
That's so much fun. One thing that Tom Felton talked about in his book that has to do with Harry Potter that I really loved was in the first movie they did cast an actor to play Peeves the poltergeist and how funny he was, and those scenes got cut. I did read that in the extended 3 hour release that they put out, there are some deleted scenes of Peeves the poltergeist, but uh, I think that would have been so cool, but also the books are so long and a movie script can only be so long. And I think the movies were perfect without Peeves. I think they would have been perfect with him too. But I think it would have been cool to see him visualized.
Yeah, I agree. Because I had, and that's something a lot of people who read the books before the movies complained about, is where was Peeves? He's this big character. And I remember reading the first um the first book with my husband because he watched all the movies and then wanted to know about the books, and he didn't know who Peeves was. So the first time I read it, he was like, "What? Who?" And
Oh,
it's a shame because do you I had to look up the actor who was set to play Peeves. But did you ever see Drop Dead Fred?
yes.
He was in that, and I loved that movie as a
That
kid.
we should watch that when we're together because that is a really funny movie. We should watch it with the kids and because it's so funny.
I
I,
haven't seen it as an adult either, so that would be funny.
I haven't
Yeah.
I probably haven't seen it since 2000. Like it's been a
Oh,
long time, like since I was a child.
yeah, I think same. So, yeah, Drop Dead Fred is about this woman and her imaginary friend, Fred. And so the guy who played Fred, let's see what's his name. Rick Mayall, hilarious actor, and he probably was a great Peeves. I don't understand why they cut him other than I guess just time.
I think I think that's probably just the main thing. I don't think that he was bad in any way. I haven't seen any scenes with him. I should look them up. But I think time, because most people don't want to go to the movies for a 4-hour movie or even a 3-hour movie.
Yeah. Well, I'm really hoping that in a few years there's someone will remake Harry Potter, but it'll be a series, and each book can have a season.
That would be really cool. And I have to bring this up because I'm still really salty about it. When we were talking about the magic of the first movie, and you brought up the trolley candies, it made me think of, you know what I'm gonna
Oh,
say. I'm so mad about the
yes.
trolley witch in The Cursed Child. I hate that. If you haven't read The Cursed Child, it's all right, but it wasn't written by J.K. Rowling, so it just,
She is adamant that she consulted in it. Like she doesn't have a problem with the cursed child, which pisses me off even more.
I know, because the way they did the trolley witch dirty,
They did. They
ugh,
did.
which still pisses me off. I read that book years ago and I'm still salty.
We won't give it away in case you're interested now and are going to read The Cursed Child. But if you know anything about Harry Potter, they just did her dirty, as Lily said.
Oh, so
Oh,
angry still. Which I think this is a good time to segue into this quote of about feelings. It says, I am not alone in having these feelings. Just as we all experience physical ill health at some stage in our lives, we also experience mental ill health too. There's no shame in that. It's not a sign of weakness. And I thought that was just good, talking about feelings and being angry, that
mm-hmm.
he does touch on mental illness in his book, and I think that's very real and very raw. And like I said, I just love that he was so open in his book.
I agree. I appreciated that too. Um, and we'll definitely talk more about his mental illness. Uh, Before we segue into that, there was just one story about his acting in The Half-Blood Prince that I wanted to touch on because I loved that story. Who plays Dumbledore? Is his name Michael Gambon? Yes. Oh, my apologies. Sir Michael Gambon, who played Dumbledore. Obviously, if you know Harry Potter, the Half-Blood Prince is a huge character change for Draco Malfoy. And Tom talks about how it was a huge moment in his career as an actor because he had so much on his shoulders in this movie to make people sympathize with Draco because he was supposed to kill Dumbledore. Spoiler alert, but I'm sure you guys know that by now. Dumbledore dies and Draco was supposed to do it. So there's this really intense scene where he has his wand pointed at Dumbledore and he's almost crying because he doesn't want to do this, but he knows if he doesn't, Voldemort is just going to kill him and probably kill his family. So he talks about the pressure he felt like he was up all night practicing his lines and he wasn't really nervous to shoot the scene. He's excited, but he knew it was his moment. So in a way, there was that pressure. And he said the big day arrived, and for some reason, no matter how prepared he felt, he kept stumbling over a certain line, like over and over again. And he just couldn't get out of his head and get out of messing up. And so they finally called for a break, and he said, Gambin magicked up a cigarette from out of his beard. He and I were often to be found outside the stage that housed the astronomy tower, having a breath of fresh air, as we referred to it, which just got to pause here. But I don't smoke cigarettes, but I would smoke a cigarette with Dumbledore.
Yes. Oh,
We
oh,
stepped outside, Gambin in his robes and the beard sock he wore, mostly to keep it straight, but partly out of fear that he'd set it alight with his cigarette. Me in my full black suit. We lit up, took a few puffs, and then I apologized. I'm sorry, Michael. I do know the lines. I don't know why I keep messing it up. I'm just a bit all over the shop right now. He kindly waved my apology away, but I was on edge and the apologies kept coming. Really, I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know why I can't get the lines straight. So he smiled and he said, Dear boy, do you have any idea how much they pay me per day? At this rate, if you keep fucking it up, I'll have a new Ferrari by next week. He was absolutely deadpan, no hint of a joke. You keep doing what you're doing, son. Did he say that to calm my nerves? I don't know. But I do know that I instantly felt the pressure lift. We went back onto the set, and from that moment on, everything went swimmingly. For the second time, I'd received a kind word from Dumbledore. I just thought that was so sweet.
It is. I'm so glad you brought that up. That story in that book, I think he says when he was saying, was he trying to, lift me up or was he trying to get, I think an experienced actor like Sir Michael Gambon, he knows how to work with younger actors, even though Tom Felton was an adult by this point, by the sixth movie, that
Mhm.
he just knew what to say to calm his nerves, that it wasn't a big deal, that he wasn't,
Mhm.
you know, no, I mean, I'm sure the directors were frustrated, but they're not Sir Michael Gambon.
Right.
So I think that's so important that there are, and he talks about a lot of the actors in Harry Potter and how they shaped the way that he became an actor. And,
Absolutely.
working in movies when Harry Potter was done, how there was a kind of a disconnect for him with the way the other actors that were not in Harry Potter interacted with each other and, held themselves. And I think that is just so important that Harry Potter had some of the most prolific actors, English
Yes.
actors of the time. And I mean, even
Mhm.
now, a lot of them still are the ones that are still with us, unfortunately,
Mhm.
to say, because we are getting to that age where a lot of the people that we loved that were, older than us, they're going to, not even just Harry Potter actors, but other actors are not just gonna, you know, which is sad.
It is sad. I know. And yeah, it's just so sweet because you're right. Sir Michael Gambon did have so much experience, and he probably knew how Tom felt from when he was a new actor, but he didn't have to be so kind. I've heard, and even Alan Rickman's diary, he talked about how annoyed he was with like Daniel sometimes and how he felt like being surrounded by so many children actors was kind of beneath his talent. So it's just so sweet that Tom got that moment with Michael.
Yes. Oh, that is so sweet. I haven't read the Alan Rickman diaries.
We were going to do it for this March Madness, but I'm telling you guys, I couldn't get through it. It was so, it was just like daily logs. Like one day he would be like, woke up, ate oatmeal, met June for lunch. And I'm like, I don't know who these people are.
I know, and
There was juicy parts, but it wasn't worth reading 500 pages to find them.
and I think because it wasn't written as a book to be published, it was,
No.
I feel like whoever's in charge of his estate wanted some money.
Yes, because we talked about this privately. I've kept journals most of my life, and even though I don't write as regularly as I used to, I said, if I die before you, you can have them published if anyone thinks they're worth reading. after I die, and that's with my permission. So I thought maybe Alan Rickman had given the same permission, but nope. The forward in the diaries says we have no idea if Alan would have wanted these published, but we think there's, I can't remember how they wrote that story or tried to twist it around, but I was like, oh no, I feel bad.
I know, and I'm sure in your journals you're not writing about oatmeal
No,
and going to
no.
lunch with a person nobody knows.
To me, a diary, at least for me, a diary, I write about the things I want to remember someday because as time goes on and you do have more experiences, some things just aren't as strong. And so I really like writing about things that are really important for me to remember someday. And I don't, and they even said in the forward, we're not entirely sure why Alan kept these chronicles. Was it just he wanted daily reflections? Was it meditative? Did he like to see patterns?
That's so, I mean, lots of people do, and I think it is, a rhythm thing. Like you get used
Yeah.
to doing things every day and it's just part of your
Mm-hmm.
routine. But also, I don't need to know what he ate for breakfast
No.
12 years ago.
Like in one, he's like, need to cut uh salad for lunch. Pants are all too tight.
I mean, relatable.
Yes, very king. And we love Alan Rickman here, even though he apparently was very judgy of Daniel Radcliffe. And sometimes it's jealousy.
Yeah. And
And
I
that's
think he
human.
probably grew to appreciate Daniel as a person as he became a
Yes.
person because I know I don't like all kids. So,
Well, but I don't know too, because we can talk about this in another podcast. But by the time they were filming Half-Blood Prince, Daniel Radcliffe was showing up to work absolutely wasted. And imagine that as your coworker.
oh, fuck.
All the scenes they had to do together. So I mean, there's three sides to every story, as they say, but it is kind of funny and cringy.
It is. Well,
Oh, that's a terrible segue. I'm sorry, Tom Felton. Um, but
oh, yes, I was gonna say, I think this is as good a time as any to talk about Tom Felton and his bout of alcoholism that he talks about in his book.
which I had no idea. So
I
he talks
didn't
about
either.
during filming the movies, he met this woman, Jade. Was she a Hufflepuff or a Ravenclaw in one of the scenes? I can't remember.
I can't remember what she was either. I know she worked closely with the stunt coordinators, and
Mm-hmm.
she was also a background actress.
So they were around each other a lot and were flirtatious and ended up dating before the movies were even finished, I think. And they dated for a long time.
Yes.
He said
And
they traveled together after the movies were done, and then they moved to California.
yes, I was just gonna say they moved. That I feel is a very intense relationship because there's not a lot of people I would move countries for.
No. Yeah, I
And
agree. And he doesn't mention really other girlfriends. Like, is that his only relationship?
good point.
He
I don't
doesn't
know.
say.
Mm-mm. But
I found the whole mention of Jade very awkward, and I'm sure he felt awkward writing it because she was such a huge part of his life that it would be weird if he didn't say anything. Like, it would be like trying to write her out of his history, right? Which isn't reasonable. But also, it's like, oh, how do you write kindly about your ex, even though it seems amicable, but it's gotta be awkward.
I know, but if you were writing a story about your life, there would be people you'd have to write about that you wouldn't like to bring up.
No, there wouldn't. That's what I mean.
But
And
it's so pivotal to your story as a person.
but he doesn't talk about a lot of the good times.
No, just that they traveled and that they basically moved to California and he became a frequent at a bar close to his home and he was
Mm-hmm.
going every day until his he was called to his lawyer's office or his manager's office, and his lawyer was there, and it was
Well,
basically
and don't forget, he thought this was like a huge movie deal, that's why his lawyer was calling him in. So he
yes.
was very excited.
And he gets there, and his girlfriend Jade is there, and it's basically an intervention that you need help. And he didn't think he never. I don't think he specifically said if he thought he had a problem, but everyone around him thought he did. So I think that's a good sign that whether he still continues to struggle with it, he was at one point struggling with it.
Thank you for bringing that up because I can honestly say that is the only criticism I have towards you, Tom. Like, you're going to read this or listen to this, but maybe he will. Did you know Tom Felton is an H3H3 fan?
Yes, he wears Teddy Fresh like
He
us.
wears so much Teddy Fresh. Family, family, family. But I didn't feel like he really owned his problem in this book as much as I think he should have. And when I say should have, it's his story, it's his life. He can talk about it how he wants to, but he has this great ability to help other people in this situation. And, in recovery, you have to deal with the truth. And my only worry is that he glossed over some things so much and said multiple times how, well, he wasn't as bad off as some of the people at rehab. Like, he wasn't doing heroin and these other things. But if he if he hasn't owned his addiction in his own heart strong enough, it just makes me worry that he will relapse someday.
Yeah, that's very true, especially because he left the first rehab after like 12 hour, he went through detox, which was less than 12 hours, and he was only there for like 8 hours, and then he walked away.
Yeah, well, it's pretty funny. It's not funny, but I think even he would laugh at it now. Yeah, he had this intervention. He was so upset at everyone there, including Jade. And they said, there's a car outside. You're leaving now. And he's like, no, what? Like, can't we do this tomorrow? And they said, no, which is, standard because a lot of people will take that night and either they'll overdose because they're trying to have one last hurrah or they'll just get out of it. They'll talk themselves out of it and never go. So you got to do it right then. But he was pissed. Like you said, he detoxed and he climbed the fucking fence, was running down a California highway, not knowing where he was, not having any water. He said he was on Grand Theft Auto mode. Every time a car would go by, he would go into the ditch or the bushes.
I've done that drinking. I thought I was gonna walk home. And it was,
I'm not gonna lie, it did make me think of you when I read that part. I'm like, Lily
yes,
can relate.
I can. Oh, yes.
Well, yeah,
I
and
got mad and at my friends at the bar, and I was like, I'm going home. And it was 15 miles. I didn't make it home.
Oh yeah, so he said he was walking forever. He was so thirsty because he didn't have a cell phone, didn't have any money. And he kept wait. He was like, okay, any minute now they're gonna come find me. Like, because eventually he was tired of walking, but nobody came. Nobody was looking for him yet. And he said he walked into a
It was like a convenience store, I think.
mm-hmm. And that's hard too, being sober. Like, it was only his second day of being sober. And when you're used to drinking every day, I can't imagine being lost, being hot, being thirsty,
Being
not
wet,
knowing
it
where
was
you are.
raining.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he
it
said
was,
he ended up on the beach.
and muddy and like scratched from, bushes, and that
Yes.
he didn't have his phone, he didn't have his wallet.
He had a couple cigarettes and all he wanted was to smoke it, but he didn't have a lighter. So he says, 3 people saved me that night. I think of them as my 3 kings. Their kindness not only helped me get back to where I needed to be, It also prompted me to come to terms with my life and what was important in it. I had no idea as I staggered up to that gas station that I was about to meet the first. There was nobody in sight apart from an elderly Indian man working the night shift behind the counter. When I asked him for a light, he was quickly apologetic. "I'm sorry, sir," he said. "I do not smoke." I stared numbly at him. Then I mumbled a couple of words of thanks and stumbled out of the gas station. I was ready to continue along the road, but then I saw the man had followed me out. "Are you okay?" he said. I barely knew what to say. How could I even begin to tell him how not okay I was? Instead, I just asked, croaky voiced, "I don't suppose you have any water?" The man pointed back into the gas station. "Go to the chiller," he said. "Take one. Take a big one." I thanked him again and staggered into the gas station where I helped myself to a 2-liter bottle of water. When I turned once more, the man was back behind the counter. "Where are you going?" he said. I told him West Hollywood. "A long way." "Yeah. You don't have any money?" I shook my head. The man smiled. He took out his wallet, opened it up, and pulled out what I could see was his last $20 bill. "Take it," he said. I stared again at him and at the 20. "I'm not a wealthy man," he said quietly. "I don't have much money. I don't have a big house. I don't have a fancy car. But I have my wife, and I have my children, and I have my grandchildren, and that means I'm a rich man. A very rich man." He fixed me with a piercing stare and inclined his head a little. "Are you a rich man?" he asked. Ooh, gives me chills.
I know, it was just making me think about how earlier we were talking about in society, it's always the newest, the fastest, the nicest. And when we stop and think about it, what do we really have that makes us rich and not wealthy? And some people don't have love. They don't have somebody that, you know, like our relationship or the relationships we have with our husbands. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's
It's
good.
true.
I think it's good to stop and think about those things when we're in those places of I need this or I don't have this, or
Mm-hmm.
that we can remember, well, we do have this, and although things aren't perfect, at least we have one thing that is consistent.
And how life-changing it was in that moment for Tom to just have that moment of kindness. Like, have you ever had someone ask, "Are you okay?" and you just break, but it's like exactly what you needed. You just needed
Yeah.
someone to ask.
One time I was in an airport and I was crying. I was having a really bad day and I was just openly crying, which is not very common for me. And this lady came up
Mm-hmm.
and she was like, I bought you a tea from Starbucks. I could tell that you needed it right now. And I just started bawling even harder because somebody noticed and thought. But it was nice to see that somebody noticed and that they cared. And it
Mm-hmm.
was a really, at the time, I was so distraught in my emotions, but I still appreciated the gesture.
Of course. Yeah, she made you feel seen in that moment, and that's huge. And sometimes we are the person walking into a gas station with no money, and sometimes we're the gas station cashier
Yes.
given our last $20.
I equate it to being somebody's last amount of money that they have on them because it's the airport and that's the Wild West, so to speak. I did have another quote from his book I wanted to say. He goes on to talk about how, he escaped from that rehab basically, but he ended up going to another group home type thing that did not work out because he broke the rules and
Mm-hmm.
it was impeding on other people's recovery. And I think his intentions were good in the fact that it's hard to follow a very strict regime when you are an adult, and but also good for them to sticking to their guns and not letting him stay when he was breaking the rules and hindering other people, especially because he is famous.
Yes. And when we say breaking the rules, he was basically flirting and cuddling and sneaking into women's rooms at this rehab facility. And you're right, it was putting the other clients' sobriety at risk. Like in rehab places and doing the steps, they totally recommend do not get into a relationship your first year of sobriety. You're just fragile and you're more likely to make decisions that you won't make a year from now. And you're also you can replace one addiction for another, and a relationship can be one of those things, right? Like we can get addicted to sex and love and relationships. And you're right. Like he was in California. They know who Tom Felton is. In what year was this? 2000. And he doesn't have a right to do that to other people. And he said he was crying, begging them to let him stay. But I'm glad they didn't because he wouldn't have learned anything from that.
Yeah, that's so true. It doesn't really say when he was
Mm.
in rehab. It just says 10 years after Potter, I felt depressed and I
Oh.
was visited by a professional interventionist and went to rehab. So,
Mm.
fairly not that long ago. The quote I was gonna say is that it says, "To this day, I never know which version of myself I'm going to wake up to. It can happen with the smallest chores or decisions. Brushing my teeth, hanging up a towel, should I have tea or coffee, overwhelm me. Sometimes I find the best way to get through the day is by setting myself tiny, achievable goals that take me from 1 minute to the next. If you sometimes feel like that, you are not alone, and I urge you to talk about it to someone. It's easy to bask in the sun, not so easy to enjoy the rain. But one can't exist without the other. The weather always changes. Feelings of sadness and happiness deserve equal mental screen time."
Hmm. It's so relatable.
And he does talk about how, he ended up living with a friend and volunteering, and he broke up with his long-term girlfriend because he realized he just wasn't in love with her anymore. And
Yeah.
I think it's important, especially for celebrities, to talk about mental health, that this book was a lot of good memories for him. And like you said, there were some questionable things about his story, even though it's his story with
Hmm.
his issues with addiction, that it's really important that even if the addiction aspect of it got a little murky, he did talk about, being depressed, and
Hmm.
that it's just as important to talk about those things as it is to talk about the really fun and exciting things in your life.
Absolutely. And I say that, but I do try to keep the context of it all, which is if I was writing about some of the most horrific moments in my life, especially mistakes I've made. I think it's our natural desire to sugarcoat it a little bit, especially when you're bearing your soul to complete strangers. So I keep that in mind. Plus, he's British, and he acknowledges the fact that talking about your feelings at all as a British person is very hard. So I'm proud. I'm proud of him for talking about the things he did in his book. I just hope in the off chance he does ever hear this that owning his story a little more fully will help more people. And I think himself being one of those so he can continue to be sober. But I loved how much attention he gave mental health because it is so important. And he says, like, you're going to, along the lines of, I'm paraphrasing, like, you get a cold and you know that people get colds. You're going to have days where you're mentally unwell and you have to take care of yourself the same way you would if you were physically sick.
That's so important, and I wish there was less stigma around taking those
Mm-hmm.
mental breaks. But I think with people like Tom Felton writing about them, that one, it's helping himself to release that pressure of keeping it in and, mm, you know, it's not going to be as hard when things get rough because he's
Mm-hmm.
able to identify that, this is a bad time, but I can get through it. And I think that's important for everyone to know.
It is. It is. And that, just like having a cold, there's some days it doesn't matter if you take medicine. Sometimes you just have to wait it out until you feel better. And mental illness is like that sometimes too. Like when he was talking about how tea or coffee or standing there brushing my teeth, I have days like that where it those seem insurmountable
I
and I just want to
know.
cry,
I
but
had
I
a,
know I'll feel better.
yes, I had a therapist one time. I was like, I didn't want to take a shower today. Like, she was like, but you did, don't you feel better? And I'm like, no, I did it because I had to.
Mhm.
And sometimes, like you said, making small goals for yourself, like, I am going to take a shower. Even if I hate it, even if I
Mhm.
have to sit my butt down in the shower, I'm
Mhm.
still in there and I did it. And if that's all I do
Yes.
today, then I still won the day.
I agree. I just love the humility and how humble he seems to be too. Like he said after he got kicked out of that rehab, he still volunteered because it was a place that when he was in rehab they volunteered at every week, and he he was kind of being rebellious in that sense, like, well, you're not going to let me back into your rehab, but you can't stop me from volunteering at this place, so I'm still going to see you guys once a week. But he ended up loving it, and how he stayed in like a small apartment with this acquaintance he had and slept on this guy's floor on a yoga mat for 3 months. It was just this guy and his dog, and how this man I can't remember his name, but he taught him to every morning they would go into the ocean, and every night before they went to bed they would do it again, and just let let the water heal you, and reconnecting with nature and just living a simpler life really shows you what's important to you, what you're passionate about, where your heart is.
That's so important. I love to sometimes just go and let the sun hit my face and just listen
Hmm.
to the birds. I live in a small town, so there's not much noise, and I can hear each animal. Like sometimes I can hear like the little like squirrels chuttering, and sometimes it's just really important just to take those sounds and those feelings and like the feeling of the sun on your face and hearing it's grounding. I know in therapy they teach
Hmm.
you grounding techniques. I can't remember what order they go in, but five things you can hear, like
Hmm.
something you can feel, three things you can smell, something like that. And I think that's just like a nice little reset for your emotions, for your mental health, even if you don't feel better afterwards, as you continue to do it, it will make a difference over time.
So true. Like you're tipping the scale in the right direction.
Yes.
Very true. And you kind of talked about it a little bit, but he mentioned how mental illness runs in his family. And I don't think we've said it yet, but his parents got divorced when he was maybe the second or third movie. I think he was 12 or 13.
Yeah, I think that's about right. And he talks about how it didn't super affect him because he was happy that his parents were, you know, s- continuing their lives and happy and not bitter, but also his brother closest to him in age, I believe, had been hospitalized on closed units, which is a nice way of saying a psych hospital or a psych
Mm-hmm.
ward, or as I like to affectionately call it, a nut hut. But with 100% transparency, I have been in one of those places. So
Yeah, you
I'm
can
not,
say it. I
yeah.
can't.
So I wanted to be very transparent that I have been there, and that's
Mm-hmm.
what I call it because it is a crazy place.
Yeah.
And he talks about not really understanding when he was a child, a young teenager, the gravity of what his brother was going through and being insensitive at times of not wanting to visit
Yeah.
his brother. And so I really like the fact that it does come full circle and he's able to realize that this is something his family struggles with, that he struggles with, and that it's okay to talk about.
Yes, it's so important. That was a huge part of the end of his book, and it really comes full circle, as you said. Like, he did the work, he got sober, he is still giving back in many ways. And I was happy to hear that he moved back to London because I can't imagine growing up the way he did and maintaining the humility he had. Moving to Hollywood is kind of like being thrown to the wolves, and he deserves better.
He does, and you're right. Because, like you said, he tried to hang out with Emma Watson, and they just couldn't in Hollywood. Even though I'm sure it's just as vapid in London for her,
Yeah,
he does point that out quite a bit, especially how much, even more so than Daniel or Rupert, that Emma was held to a higher standard because she was a female and she was expected to
yeah.
act grown. And
And she was the youngest.
I know, and just so much responsibility in that respect on her. And I do love how much credit he gives them.
Yes, I agree. And he doesn't really touch on it because it is Emma's story to tell, but I can't imagine all of, like, if he has one crazy guy changing his name and offering to adopt him, imagine all the creeps that Emma Watson has dealt with. I mean, I remember seeing her face from the Harry Potter movies photoshopped on porn for years now. It's
Yes.
disgusting.
And I read this thing about how on her 18th birthday, she was out to dinner and like a paparazzi laid on the sidewalk to take a picture up her skirt, and it was on the
That
tabloids the next day.
is
On her
terrible.
18th birthday. So
Sickos.
I know. And the fact that they would put that on tabloids. I mean, they do it in America too. So, but people were counting down like they were the Olsen twins with her, and that's just disgusting.
It is.
Because I know it technically works like you're 18, but one day you're 17, the next day you're 18. That's
Y-
disgusting to me.
Yes, you're
Like,
so right.
and
And
there are
she,
some people who don't, like, they don't see a problem with that. And I'm like, yesterday this was illegal, but today it's not.
yeah, she has managed to become such like a smart, caring, philanthropic, social justice warrior, and I love her.
Me too. I really liked her in Perks of Being a Wallflower. Some people didn't.
Me too.
I really enjoyed that movie, but we read the book a way before they ever decided on a movie.
Yes.
I remember reading the book in middle school, maybe. So it was
Yeah,
I liked her in that movie.
me too. It's so funny because we loved the book when we first read it. Because, yeah, I think we read it a couple years after the book had come out, but we were probably 12, 13, and we loved the book back then. And we read it again as adults in our book club, and we hated the book, but we
We
loved the
did.
movie.
Yes,
The movie is good.
which is very against the grain, so to speak, because usually we're like,
Blasphemous.
oh, the book is so much better. No, Perks of Being a Wallflower, the movie. But the author was one of the screenwriters for the movie, so I
Mm-hmm.
will give him props for that. But
True.
the
Clap.
book was
Golf clap.
just, yeah, the book was just, maybe it's because it was written for young adults, but I've read other books that are written for young adults and I like them. So,
Yeah, it's now that we're adults looking back, the main character is just like kind of annoying and emotionally manipulative, and
yes.
it just didn't hit the same. But the
No.
movies made the character seem very lovable and endearing and sweet, not
Yes.
annoying.
Not in the way that I think of some people that we or may not have known in high school.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe we're just triggered.
uh,
But Tom Felton, props. I enjoyed this book. What do you rate it?
I would rate it 8 out of 10.
I was gonna say 4 out of 5, so that's the same thing.
Yes, it is. I don't know why I did 8 out of 10, but
Hey,
it's
that's
the same
a
as 4 out of 5.
that's a B. That's
Yeah.
that's better than Tom ever got in high school.
Oh, well, next week we will be talking about The Spare by Prince
Ooh,
Harry. Oh,
I need to finish it too.
I'm very excited because it will be fresh in my brain, but I have all weekend at
Yes.
work. Shouldn't be too
Yes.
busy, and I'm gonna crack down and start reading. I think I can read it faster than I can listen to it, so
Yeah, I agree. It was much too long of an audiobook. I'm reading it as well. But I've seen bits and pieces of the audiobook, and we're definitely gonna have to play some because it's too funny
okay.
in
We'll
his
get those
voice and
ready.
everything.
Yes. Well, it's been fun, you know,
It has.
tonight. All the tea we cannot sip podcast is in full swing. We've been doing this since the beginning of the year. I'm so proud of us,
Me
and
too.
I'm really enjoying this, and I love doing this with you.
I do too. It always makes my week.
Me too.
And please be sure to subscribe if you got this far. You obviously were along for the ride. And once we get 1,000 subscribers, we can start doing live streams. So we'll actually be able to have book clubs and conversations with you guys. And that would be awesome.
Yes, it would. We love to talk. And like I said, I love to put my opinion on things. And
And we
uh,
have plenty of them.
yes. But we're always honest about, where we're coming from and why we think the way we think. And I don't think anything we think is too far outrageous to
I
get
don't
us
think so either.
to be too crazy. So, well, have a good night and thank you for listening.
Bye.
Bye.